Okay, so I'm not going to say that much about Lindemann. Again, I think Lindemann's essay is pretty straightforward. Um, just a couple of things. Okay, so feminist ethics has only been around for about 100 years, which is like a blink of the eye, right? Hardly anything compared to the history of philosophy. So it's pretty new. Um, now, just to kind of explain how Lindemann starts her essay, which seems a little strange. It's like uh, what feminist ethics is not, and she like, is it making women equal to men? And she raises objections to that. Um, Women defining themselves, she says that's problematic for various reasons. She's not just pulling this stuff out of her, whatever. These are some of the answers to the question of what feminist ethics is that have been presented since in the last 100 years. So she's responding to other people's proposals, okay, and rejecting them. That's how she starts. Okay. I should note that she says gender is not simply a fact. It seems like it is because of physiology, but it's actually a social norm, a social construction. I think that's a really important point to note, and she has various arguments to that effect, right? Gender is a social assignment, a norm, not a simple physical characteristic. It's not, of course, she's not an idiot. Of course, there's physical characteristics associated with male and female, but ultimately, it is not simply a fact. It is a social norm with social expectations. Which brings her to her primary thesis that feminist ethics should be about power relations, and that women should defer to men, and that what feminist ethics should ultimately be about is addressing the unequal power relationships, which she, by the way, does not exclusively say has to do with gender, but she says people engaged in this activity of feminist ethics should be concerned with other things, other power relationships like racial relationship, race and even kids versus adults, which is definitely a power relationship. All right. So we'll cover every single point. Let's see. I guess a couple of things at the end I want to address. Feminist ethics is primarily normative, but it's it has a large descriptive part to it. This is a very interesting thing, because one thing about ethics is that it is considered a normative study. Now, do kind of think norms. Okay, so a descriptive study talks about how things are. What is the world like? Pretty much all of science is describing the world. So science is basically descriptive, especially the hard sciences. Let's say chemistry and physics and such. Ethics is normative because it's not describing the way the world is, because ethics is about how people should be, how people ought to behave. So it's normative. It's not about what is, it's about how it ought to be. And she argues that feminist ethics needs to be very descriptive, because a lot of the time, what the power relationships and the inequalities between male and female are hidden or overlooked, or maybe put it this way, they're so embedded into people's worldviews and the way they think that they don't even recognize them. That people pass it over as just that's the way it is, and don't even notice. So she thinks that feminist ethics needs to point these things out. So it has to be descriptive first of all, to point out these inequities that most people don't even well, not most people. It doesn't register. You know, for a lot of people, it just plain doesn't register because they just think of that's how it is. And feminist ethics needs to point out that no, it doesn't have to be that way, and yes, that's not the way it should be. One of a good example that she does is about who's in charge of taking care of children and paying for children. And it tends to be always be left to the mother. It's getting better these days with that, but it's, you know, that's not inevitable. That didn't have to be that way. And she says, so long as it is invisible, it will not change. You need to bring it out and describe what's happening to affect change. So feminist ethics has to be descriptive in addition to be normative, which is a departure from the way a lot of philosophers think about ethics, because they always think of it as purely normative. The other thing is her little discussion about the difference between politics and ethics, which people try to divide. I always thought that was a difficult distinction to make because there's always overlap. Come on. If you look at all the ethical issues, they always bring up things like the most classic ones are like capital punishment and abortion. Well, there's legal issues involved with those things. And so in other words, politics, law. You know, legal and ethical are different, right? Because, hey, the law could be unethical, right? But anyways, so they're not the same thing, but they always overlap. And she said she's trying to argue that in feminist ethics, they definitely overlap. I would say that that's kind of true in general, even though some people like to try to make it, you know, try to make some clear distinction between the two. It doesn't typically work out that way. Actually, and you know what, a lot of philosophers acknowledge that fact besides her. And it's not necessarily just feminist ethics. That's probably true of most ethics. Finally, she argues that feminist ethics is theoretical, but it's also applied ethics. I'm not sure it uses that exact terminology. Anyway, okay, yeah, applied ethics. She does. I think she does. Applied ethics is when you take ethical theories and apply them to particular subjects. Like we're going to talk about euthanasia next. So you use the theories and you apply it to a particular problem: euthanasia, capital punishment, abortion, whatever. Right? You take the theories and you apply them. But there's a distinction in ethics between the purely theoretical, like Kant and Mill and Hume and Aristotle, and actually the applied ethics, where you're trying to argue on a particular subject. And she wants to say that feminist ethics blurs that line between applied and theoretical, and that the two kind of inform one another. Again, interesting. Not exactly, you know, earth-shattering, you know. it's not like, wow, that's a crazy idea. You know, probably it probably happens in other, you know, not just in feminist, but again, not simply in feminist ethics, but she does argue that the distinction between practical or applied ethics and theoretical ethics is not that sharp in terms of feminist ethics, and she gives a bunch of reasons why that's the case. All right, that's definitely enough, I think. I think you can work out the rest of it on your own. It's not, like I said, if you read it carefully, it's not terribly difficult to follow Lindemann. All right, thank you.